2018.
It's been a year since India locked itself down to fight the COVID-19 pandemic. We are once again in the middle of a surge in cases, and a complete lockdown is seen largely as an ineffective option. The pandemic and the lockdown have hurt India's middle class the most, according to a report by the Pew Research Center. India's middle class shrunk by a massive 32 million, which is worse than China, and accounted for 60% of the global retreat. Before COVID-19, 9 million people in India were classified as middle class. As things stand, this is down to 66 million. Another working paper by the International Monetary Fund turns the spotlight on income inequality between India's urban and rural areas. The gap between 5 richest states and 5 poorest states have widened in the last few years. While millions have been lifted out of poverty, wages have been stagnating. And even today, income in Bihar is just about 15% of those in India. For context, this is the same gap in income between the United States and India. The big question we're asking: how can we set things right for India's middle class and bridge the income gap? Almost all states have reported their annual budgets, which show that the scars of COVID-19 run deep, and getting the economies back to where they were in 2019 will be an uphill task, to say the least. Well, joining me now to take the discussion forward is Rakesh Kochar, Senior Researcher at the Pew Research Center. We're also joined by Sriram Balasubramanian. He is an economist and the co-author of the International Monetary Fund's working paper on income inequality. Madan Sabnavis, Chief Economist at Care Ratings, also joins us today. Gentlemen, many thanks for joining us here on the show. Rakesh Kochar, let me come to you first. Your research, your report, which is an analysis of the World Bank data, throws open, a very, very dismal picture when we look at the middle class. While your analysis says that the impact is worldwide, it is much more sharper and starker when we look at it from the India perspective as well as Africa. And if we compare it to China, India has performed really worse in keeping its middle class where they were as far as their incomes is concerned. Help us understand how bad is the situation when it comes to this inequality, when we talk about the shrinking middle class moving to poverty, and why is it that India is affected worse than that as compared to, let's say, China?
So, the pandemic had a worldwide impact, shutting businesses and putting millions out of work, pretty much every corner of the globe. But in India in particular, the downturn was especially sharp. Before the pandemic hit, the World Bank estimated, for instance, that growth in India and China would be roughly equivalent at about 6% each for 2020. But after the pandemic's effect became more visible, growth estimates for India were revised down to near minus 10%, which is a 16-point turnaround, a very sharp reduction in growth. Comparatively, in China, although growth estimates were reduced, it avoided a contraction. It is estimated that China's economy expanded a little bit in 2020. So that is the key reason for the difference between what happened to the middle class or the number of poor in India versus what happened in China. And because India is such a big country in terms of the number of people, 1.4 billion, roughly speaking, it contributed a lot to what happened to globally. Any changes that happen in India contribute a large share to the global trend.
Mr. Kochar, in your assessment, when you look at the data, how much of the progress that India made in poverty reduction would have been lost in the last 1 year?
Well, our estimate suggests that it's a rollback of a few years at a minimum. The number of poor more than doubled relative to what it might have been without the pandemic in 2020. So if there had been no pandemic, our estimate is that there would have been about 60 million poor in India, living on less than $2 a day, according to near the World Bank standard. But after the pandemic hit, the number of poor in India is estimated to have been 135 million. So that's more than a doubling of the number of poor in India compared to, the alternative, what it might have been. This is a fairly sharp increase that contributed a large share of the increase in the number of poor globally.
Right, right. Sriram, Sriram Balasubramanian, if I bring the context from the Pew Research report, what the analysis shows to what your working paper talks about, the common thread there is the worst impacted are those that are working, especially the migrant population, the lower middle class, which is the vulnerable population, where a shock to income could push them to poverty. And this is largely the bracket which is migrating from one state to the other in lieu of jobs, in view of livelihoods. What in your sense has been the impact to this? The lockdown showed the impact on the migration side. We saw migrants move back to states like that of Bihar and Uttar Pradesh. But in your assessment, what has been the impact when it comes to the incomes that they had been making?
Thanks, Ashna, for having me here. Just want to reiterate that these are my personal views and do not really reflect the IMF or the IEO's views. Having said that, I think you make a very valid point. In our research, what we find is that the inequality of opportunity is something that is being seen more and more even during the pandemic. For example, even as early as May or even June last year, a lot of the migrants were returning back from their rural areas back to urban areas, despite the perceived higher risk of COVID in the urban areas. That is primarily because of these opportunities of livelihoods in the urban areas. What we find is that in our research that the location premium, i.e. the place where you live, plays an important role in migration trends. So people would prefer to move from a rural area to an urban area, even though the urban area is more unequal, primarily because even if it's a reduction in their class position, in terms of opportunities, there are more opportunities in the urban areas. You see those trends coming through even in recent years, especially post the pandemic. And another important point that we also find in our research is also the notion of urban inequality driving overall income inequality in India. So because of that fact, you have a situation where urban inequality is increasing, yet people want to go to urban areas because there's an opportunity sort of deficit in the rural areas. So I think those trends still continue. And obviously on the state picture, which you mentioned earlier, we also noticed that the states, especially the top 5 and the bottom 5 states, are fairly diverging in their trends, in their per capita incomes. So that also indicates over a period of time, the states which perform well are doing really well, whereas the states which are not performing well are still trying to catch up. It could mean that states are competing well. One theory is that because of the competition, there is this divergence. But if you notice over the last 10, 15 years, it's the same states which are growing at the top level. And that indicates that, the richer states are doing well and the poorer states are still playing catch up.
Right.
Obviously, there's some data constraints for us to analyze, but the broad picture is what I've described from our research.
Right. Sriram, if I can take a very quick follow-up question to that, the model that India followed for growth, which is, urbanizing certain centers, was anticipated and thought that would lead to a spatial conversion of growth. So, areas around the urban centers would also see growth happening, and that could maybe minimize migration. We haven't really seen that happen. In fact, the inequality has widened between the urban centers and the rural areas. And in fact, like you pointed out, even within the urban centers, the inequality is quite large. What explains why this model has not worked in India, in your assessment?
I wouldn't say that it hasn't worked, but if you really look at poverty alleviation, India has done significantly well over the last few decades. Growth has brought a lot of opportunities across board and changed our lifestyles for the better. But on the other hand, there's always a tipping point in the sense, once urban areas become too clustered, and the alternatives that you would look out for would be probably, expanding the opportunities into the semi-rural and semi-urban areas. Because if you look at most cities, for example, Chennai, Bengaluru, or any major city in India, most of the the residential areas and even the cities have panned out to almost semi-rural or semi-urban areas because of the lack of space and lack of density of people. So I think it's part of the evolution of development. I think we're at a good stage where we can redress and make some of these changes. And I would suggest that it has worked well thus far in terms of bringing lots of people out of poverty. But for us to sustain this growth, I think we need to look at building more opportunities and also moving these opportunities to more semi-rural and semi-urban areas so that more people can benefit from them.
Okay. Madan Sabnavis, come in on this. The crux of migration and income inequality is how much is the state able to provide for its workers, its people, its citizens in their own state, as far as jobs are concerned, as far as infrastructure is concerned, as far as a better standard of living is concerned. Now, we've seen this income disparity among states. We've seen the inequality, the economic inequality among states getting exacerbated by the lockdown, the pandemic in the last 1 year. We have states like Uttar Pradesh and Bihar seeing an influx of migrants come back to their states, which they have to also provide for. At the same time, look at providing opportunities, job opportunities, and the likes. How are states, faring as far as looking at this income regeneration is concerned in their states, and is there room for that in the state budgets, considering most of the state budgets is also battered because of the lockdown and the impending economic slowdown?
See, as it has been mentioned by one of the panelists, I think the income disparity across states is something which is fairly historical. And if you look at the last 10, 15 years, there's a fixed set of states which seem to be doing well, and the others seem still to be in the process of trying to climb up and never really quite making it. Now, why does this happen? This all depends upon the initial phases of modernization and industrialization, where certain states have an advantage. And if you look at labor tends to go to places where there are opportunities. And when I'm looking at these states which are doing well, they're the ones which have the infrastructure. And I think what's really required is a physical infrastructure as well as financial infrastructure. You need to have access to both of them. And these are the ones which are actually growing at a high rate. There's high rates of urbanization taking place. So you have the real estate sector booming. So as long as this happens, there will be a tendency for labor to move towards these so-called better off states. And the others will remain more agrarian, more rural oriented in nature. Now, what we have seen during the pandemic is nothing which is unexpected, because the moment we saw that the wheels of industry was not allowed to operate, we saw most of the services closing down. It was but natural that people had to go back to their states. And the states, given their level of budgets, given their level of development and the kind of infrastructure which they have not been able to provide the same kind of recourse to the labor coming back to their hometowns. So I think this is a fundamental problem, something which has happened since independence, I would say. I don't think the pecking order has changed significantly in the last 20 years or 30 years, ever since we had economic reforms. So I think the pattern remains the same. And while it's one thing to say that poverty has come down, I think inequality has gotten exacerbated along the way. Because poverty will obviously get reduced because the economies have been growing. But definitely the rich are getting richer, the poor are getting not that poor, but definitely they're not their incomes are not increasing to the same extent.
Absolutely.
And just look at the way in which the governments have reacted. If you're very poor, you're given certain cash transfers. If you're in the industrial sector, there are lots of benefits being given in terms of all these credit schemes which have come through. But the moment you're in a middle class, you're actually left to fend for yourself. And I think that's been a fundamental problem in India, that the middle class gets left out. And I just have some data here from this World Inequality database, which says that the top 10% in the last 30 years or so, their share has gone up from 34% to 56%. the middle 40% came down from 43% to 29%, and the bottom 50%, 22% to 15%. So definitely there's been this, poverty, we have come out of poverty, but inequality has increased. And I don't think there's an easy solution the moment we have decided to go for a market-oriented approach towards growth.
Okay, since we are with a market-oriented approach for growth, there is still some time before we can see the situation on the ground change. Madan Sabnavis, Sriram and Mr. Rakesh Kochar, hold your thoughts. We just time for a very short break. We'll come back on the other side to carry forward this discussion and find out the solutions.
अहमियत इस बात की नहीं कि आप किन बुलंदियों पर हैं, बल्कि इस बात की है कि यहां पहुंचने का हौसला किससे मिला। देश की मिट्टी से। कजारिया देश की मिट्टी से बनी टाइल से देश को बनाते हैं।
With the pandemic rapidly transforming consumer behavior and changing the future of e-commerce,
which are the top two?
How are Indian companies planning to woo customers in 2022? Watch the Blueprint Business in the New Normal. At this time, only on CNBC TV 18.
Presented by KPMG.
With Western Union, you can go online here and send money there. Send money online to bank accounts around the world for zero transaction fee.
At Hyatt, our culture is of emotional connections, not just mere transactions.
As the hospitality industry starts seeing signs of revival, what does the road ahead look like for the sector? Watch Hyatt driving intentional growth in India at these times.
Presented by Hyatt.
Since 1919, Citroën has created innovations that make every drive comfortable. Now you can experience that comfort in India. Citroën. Inspired by you. Inspired by India.
Digital transformation is need of the hour to bring value to any business in today's time. And that is possible only when technology is at the core of it. Platforms like SMB Utsav are key enablers in helping SMBs to make this transformation real.
CNBC TV 18 and Microsoft present SMB Utsav. Let's rebuild together. To know more about SMB Utsav, please visit the website www.cnbctv18.com. SMB Utsav.
Savings is just not possible on medicines.
It is possible. NetMeds app gives the best offers and savings up to 20% on MRP. NetMeds, India's own pharmacy.
What are the benefits of investing in debt mutual funds? Why should an investor consider them? Kotak Mutual Fund presents Invest Mentor at these times only on CNBC TV 18.
An investor education initiative by Kotak Mahindra Mutual Fund.
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
बाहर पॉल्यूशन कितना बढ़ गया है ना
अंदर भी पॉल्यूशन कितना बढ़ गया है ना अरे मैं नहीं वो हमारा एसी बोल रहा है
Presenting Panasonic ACs that removes 99% PM 2.5 and improves indoor air quality.
School, where our children don't just study but nurture their dreams, where they learn something new every day, where they set their future plans in motion and where they forge everlasting bonds of friendship. But in India, 1 out of 5 girls drop out of school on reaching puberty. Because we never teach them about periods. But we are here to change that with Period of Pride, a petition to make periods a compulsory part of our school education. To sign the petition, give a missed call on 9999671283 or our website www.periodofpride.com. I am proud to be associated with Whisper and Network 18, hashtag Period of Pride. एक स्वच्छ सोच।
Welcome back. We are talking about income inequalities across states in India and India as compared to the world. And I have three very senior economists, authors joining me here to discuss this. Madan Sabnavis, you were talking about, the state economies and, where that leaves us when we look at further growth. Case in point, if we look at current scenario, we are staring at a second wave of COVID-19, which means there could be further restrictions. While a proper lockdown may not be imminent, but certain restrictions in worst affected cities, districts would affect and disrupt livelihoods again, is what the estimate is from some of the experts on the ground. How do you think the states, with the inequality picture, are in a position to manage this? Is there room in their fiscal space with the states to manage a second hit on the economy where they would have to be providing for the citizens?
In fact, even during the first wave, we have seen that the states have not really been able to do much in order to help the people. Why do I say this? Because the states operate on the basis of the FRPM norms. So while they were relaxed last year and probably being relaxed even for fiscal 22, where you're allowed to run a fiscal deficit up to 4%, the states were actually grappling with the issue of saying that, look, my revenue is not increasing, so therefore I'll have to control my expenditure. So what they've done is that they've cut down on their discretionary expenditure. And this is a picture we have seen across all the states. Because you had to maintain a fiscal deficit number, your revenues are not increasing. So therefore it was but natural that they did not have that kind of money to spend in terms of relief. Most of the relief which came through have been coming from the center, and even the center stopped after a period of time. I think after November or so, even the flows from the center had stopped for in terms of the cash transfers which were being given to the people. So to my mind, I think with the second wave coming in, it's going to be a fairly grim situation. Definitely, it's not going to be as bad as what it was the first time, but some of the signals sent by certain states in terms of curbing economic activity is probably going to affect the SME sector. And SMEs, mind you, are the ones which provide the largest amount of employment. And this is where your inequality actually germinates, because if SMEs are out of business, they're not able to employ their people, they're not able to provide the income salaries to the people. There will be a situation where we're going to go back to the same stage of saying that the inequality gets aggrandized, and there will be more people who are out of work. I think the main objective of the government, either the center or the state, is to keep providing these jobs. And the governments cannot do it on their own. You'll have to let the private sector operate in a normal manner so that they're able to provide these jobs. The states have a limitation in terms of what they can do in their budgets. So I don't expect the state government to spend more money out here, but you need to create the enabling environment, which unfortunately has not been done in the last couple of years, rather the last year and probably even for the next year on account of the fear of the pandemic.
Okay. And creating that enabling environment now with the kind of fiscal picture would be difficult for the states as things stand on the ground. Sriram Balasubramaniam, a quick word, looking at where we are with a second wave imminent in India, impacting more states than the first wave. In fact, this time we are seeing cases rise in small towns also as compared to only largely the bigger cities, what we saw in the first half of the pandemic. Do you see this income inequality expand further from where we are right now? And as far as migration is concerned, we had seen some, a large part of the workforce, the migrant workforce, come back to the largest cities around October, November, because obviously there weren't income opportunities in their home states and they were back to larger cities. Do you anticipate a replay of what we saw during the first part of the pandemic as far as migration and income inequality is concerned? Sriram, you're on mute. You need to...
Can you repeat that question just once more?
I said, now that we are in the midst of a second wave, we are seeing that smaller towns are also getting impacted versus only the larger cities that we saw, seeing rise in cases in the first part of the pandemic. So going forward, how do you see this pan out when we look at the income inequalities across states? Do we see more migration happening now? And, what can be done to ease the situation and ease the burden now?
Yeah, thank you. I think, what is going to pan out, based on the second wave is something for anyone to guess. But from the past trends, I don't see any big change in the way people would react. Because as I mentioned, in terms of opportunities, it's more for a sort of a long-term goal where you try to develop opportunities across board. So I don't see many changes even during the second wave in the way people will react and the way migration trends happen. In terms of income inequality, it's anyone's guess. I think we need to have a more robust data set to make a qualified assessment on that. But I think what can be done is some nudges or some measures which can help to, ease some of these challenges. One is the role of digitization. I think India has a brilliant digital infrastructure, even in semi-rural and urban areas, and especially the direct benefit transfers and some of these targeted welfare schemes can be optimized even more to ensure or buffer against the second wave and onslaught of the second wave. So I think using some of these technologies, and especially digital technology, to leverage and push through some of these schemes to ensure that people have support, even if there is sort of a temporary pause in say the economic activity. So in the short run, I think it would be good to focus on some of the strengths that we have and leverage them to ensure that we take care of the second wave as well.
Okay. All right, Rakesh Kochhar, last word to you. A quick one though. What sort of an impact do you see on the poverty side with the data sets that you're analyzing? I remember the data set from World Bank that said that in India, 50% of the population is the vulnerable population, where one income shock could push them to poverty. We've already seen an impact in the first wave. What are you anticipating now, since COVID-19 pandemic is yet not over? We seem to be with it for a few more months. A very quick one.
So, it may delay the recovery, economic recovery, although looking at countries such as the US or Europe, which have experienced second and third waves, the economic effects are more muted than the first wave. But nonetheless, there probably will be a delayed recovery the longer the pandemic carries on.
All right, Rakesh Kochhar, Sriram Balasubramanian and Madan Samnavis, thank you so much for joining us here on CNBC TV 18 to discuss this important issue of the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on income inequalities across states and rising poverty, a shrinking middle class, and some answers that we hope to help us address this situation. Well, with that, it's a wrap on this special broadcast. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned to CNBC TV 18. News and updates continue.